Hey, what is going on, guys? Nathan here with a Magic the Gathering video. In this video, I would like to take you guys on a tour through my Kemba Ka-Regent Commander deck. Now, this deck is basically a deck that is focused on equipping Kemba as much as possible to activate her trigger. And her trigger is that during the beginning of your upkeep, you get you rather get a 2/2 cat token for each equipment attached to Kemba. And she's very cheap card, which means that you can get her out pretty early, which is somewhat of a good and bad thing, which I'll get into in a little bit. But this is sort of the type of commander deck that would exist if the Commander 2014, the Forged in Stone deck, was meant to have Kemba as the overall commander instead of Nahiri. She is one of the optional commanders that is included within the set, and just, I kind of just wanted to experiment with getting consistent tokens from her instead of taking the riskier path of having Nahiri as your commander, because with Nahiri, she's a very good commander. It's just that she's kind of a crutch. You really need to focus on farming her into the Stoneforge Blade, and to me, that is not, I mean, if you run even into like a trample deck, for example, or just a red burn deck, you can keep planeswalkers from getting off their ultimate very easily. So instead, I wanted to just kind of build a deck around Kemba, who seems to be a consistently good commander, and she somewhat is. So let me go over her and sort of my experience with her. Now, with this deck overall, I've played about 15-ish matches with this deck. I actually have like the physical version of this deck next to me. It's about 2 feet away. And the experience I've had is that it is great that Kemba is only a 3 cost. As you can see there, 1 colorless, 2 white, which means that she's typically the first commander that will get out in a multiplayer commander match, which is good because you can immediately, if you have the equipment, you can immediately start equipping her and getting some tokens out. But the bad thing is that because she's the very first commander, and because she's played so early, there's not really a lot to defend her with. She tends to just get removed really fast. I mean, basic burn, just not necessarily creature damage, because it's better to kind of let the damage go through than lose her right away. But something with like green trample or just burn, like I said before, will end up removing her, or just a generic destroy spell or exile spell if you're playing against a white or black deck. Very common. So anyway, people will pretty much see her on the field right away, see that she's vulnerable, and will remove her almost immediately. And that's kind of the experience I've had with her, and that's really bad. Now, you can sort of wait until other commanders are on the board. Maybe somebody is a little bit more intimidating, and then cast her to kind of, under the table, maybe she kind of blends in with the chaos of the board where she won't be noticed as much. But that is, once again, you're going to sacrifice the amount of turns that you could be getting tokens out. So I found that you can go either way. One method isn't really better than the other. So I will point out, because Tapped Out organizes the cards I have here by type, but I will actually give sort of my version. So in this deck, there are 17 equipment cards, which is pretty good. That means that there is a 17% chance at any given time that you will draw an equipment card, which means that if you were to draw an opening hand of 7 cards, you are almost guaranteed to have an equipment card in hand, or at least the odds are with you, because 16% is about 1 in 6, and you're going to draw 7 cards. Anyway, so it's always good to have equipment. There are 22 creatures, so there's 16 actual creatures, but there's also spells that create tokens. So I say, I sort of mash them together. There are 22 creatures or creature makers, as in creature making spells, and then there are 11 power and toughness buffs. Now, to sort of complement the way Kemba spawns tokens, I included a lot of enchantments and creature buffs. So basically, we've got stuff like, we've got stuff like Honor of the Pure. White creatures you control get +1/+1, and there are approximately 11 of these that do this ability or something similar to this ability. And in almost every match that I've played with this deck, you can get at least 1 to 2 of these on the board in a match. And it's great because these are actually really cheap, and once they stack upon each other, your creatures are all of a sudden much more formidable. So we've got, let's see, we've got Cathar's Crusade. Does the same thing basically. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So this can be actually better than something like Honor of the Pure if you happen to cast a lot of creatures. And whenever a creature enters the battlefield, that does include tokens. So if I were to play something like Spectral Procession, which puts 3 1/1 spirits, then all of a sudden everything gets 3 +1/+1 counters, and that's actually really, really good, which is actually why it is a higher cost than something like Honor of the Pure. Glorious Anthem, creatures you control get +1/+1, Honor of the Pure. Light from Within, each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each white mana symbol in its mana cost, so which is great. It doesn't go well with tokens because tokens have a converted mana cost of 0, but it's good for your creatures. For something like Grand Abolisher, it would all of a sudden be a 4/4 instead of a 2/2. Marshal's Anthem, in addition to its other effect, you can creatures you control get +1/+1. Parapet is, I'm not sure if this is really the best card for what it's supposed to do, but I figured it's another cheap, affect all your creatures +0/+1, so I included it anyway. So like other creature buffs would be like True Conviction. I had to include. This is one of the best enchantments in white. Creatures you control have double strike and lifelink. That's amazingly good. In addition to Brave the Sands, which is also really good in my opinion. Creatures you control have vigilance, and you can each creature you control can block an additional creature, which is awesome. So anyway, there are not including stuff like Brave the Sands and True Conviction, there are 11 cards like Glorious Anthem that will give +1/+1. There's something like Spirit of Helia, there's something like Howl of Triumph. So there's 11 of those, which is pretty good. So you have an 11% chance of drawing one of those cards, which is definitely very good and definitely a huge help. And last of all, we've got a smattering of control, so to speak. So we've got Comeuppance, which basically reflects all damage that is coming at you for a turn, which is awesome. Congregate, not control, this is just kind of miscellaneous, but Congregate tends to come in really handy because this is a token deck, and especially when you're playing in a multiplayer match, you can get ridiculous numbers of creatures on the board, so that really helps. Plus, if you're playing something like where you have like an ally or something, it's target player, not necessarily yourself, so you can really save an ally if they're in danger. Swords to Plowshares, and then Wing Shards. Wing Shards is really good because it's almost like a multiplying removal spell. It's just that your opponent chooses which of their creatures are removed. But I think that's like you can't not include Wing Shards just because in Commander, there's a lot of spells being cast because people tend to have a lot of mana, and people will be attacking each other because there's just going to be a lot of stuff to get off the board and a lot of damage to deal out. So okay, so we'll get into the pretty much the most important part of the deck, the equipment. So the thing is, the mana cost for this deck, and this does relate to equipment, is somewhat deceiving because equipment really, like, it's because you want to equip equipment to Kemba as fast as possible to get her trigger. Equipment almost costs double what it actually says it does. For example, if we took something like, let's take something like Quietus Spike. It costs 3 to cast, but typically you really want to equip stuff as fast as possible because those cat tokens, even if you do get them from Kemba, they still have Summoning Sickness because they were summoned on your turn. So that just puts more emphasis on getting those tokens out as fast as possible. Now, to do that, you need to equip stuff as fast as possible. And while this is technically 3 colorless to cast, it's really 6 to get onto Kemba so that you can get those tokens. So this might say, yeah, this equipment is going to cost 3 to cast. It really costs double that amount of mana to actually get onto a creature. So really, things like these 2 and 3 costs, and even some of these 1 costs, actually should be over on this side of the mana curve, the 5, 6, 7, because you almost need to add together their casting cost and then their equip cost. So let's get into the actual equipment. Argentum Armor is pretty much the most powerful equipment that is in this deck because it's the most expensive for sure. Cost 6, equip 6, and then equip creature gets +6/+6, and you can destroy a permanent when it attacks. Now, my experience with Argentum Armor, not really just Argentum Armor, but the higher costing equipment in general, is that typically something like Argentum Armor is played in the late game when you actually have the mana to cast and equip the equipment. So what happens is by that time late in the game, I will typically have maybe 2 to 3 to 4 even equipments on the field, and I'd rather have multiple cheaper equipments attached to Kemba rather than something really expensive like Argentum, because otherwise you won't get as many tokens. Now, it's up to you to make the decision on whether you would actually have a buffed up Kemba than a few more tokens. That's to your discretion depending on the conditions of the match. But overall, I would say that it's better to have a lot of the smaller equipment just because those tokens, especially when combined with the other buffs, like I was saying, where your creatures get +1/+1, those tokens are incredibly valuable. So anyway, Argentum Armor is good, but in reality, it doesn't really get equipped to a token that you have, or a creature that you have, rather, that much. Cage Sun, I'll just go over all of the artifacts, even if it's not equipment. Cage Sun is basically just a mana doubler, and it gives you the additional creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1, so that's awesome. Having double mana is so powerful, because then all of a sudden, all of these equipments, for example, you can equip right away, and that's great. So Cage Sun, very good card, very expensive artifact, and rightly so. Chariot of Victory, cast for 3, equip 1. That's why Chariot of Victory is so good, because not only does it have good effects, equip creature has first strike, trample, and haste, but it has equip 1. Equip costs are much more better to look at in terms of what you'll be spending on equipment in a match than the casting cost, because you can get equipment on the field, and chances are that equipment is not really going to go away. But if you need to, let's say Kemba was killed early in the game, and all of a sudden you have, you're going to cast her again, and you have all of this equipment to attach to her, the equip cost is really what you want to pay attention to. And this might cast for 3, but the equip 1 is so unbelievably cheap for what it does, which is pretty great. So Chariot of Victory, definitely very good equipment. Okay, so Kemba is very valuable to have on the field, and you typically want to keep her around just for her effect, with obviously to get more tokens each turn. So an ability that combos really good with her is Shroud/Hexproof, because if she can't be targeted and removed right away, and she keeps just sticking around, just having her effect trigger and trigger, you're obviously going to get more tokens, which is great. So there are a decent amount of Hexproof/Shroud cards in this deck, and that's almost more valuable than something like Chariot of Victory, which gives all of these awesome effects, or something that buffs up the actual card. So Hexproof and Shroud, very valuable. We're not going to get the Rogue trigger on this card, but it's still kind of worth it anyway. Unfortunately, it is an equip 3 cost, which is made me somewhat hesitant to include this card in the deck at first, but I figured it was worth it for the extra +2/+0. Explorer Scope is pretty much free scry / land. Basically, whenever your equipped creature attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. Basically, this will successfully triggering this equipment will prevent mana clumps, and it will also sort of give you free scry. At least you can know what you're going to draw next, so you can sort of plan ahead of time what you want to do. But other than that, it's playing extra land a turn, assuming that you have the land on the top of your deck, which is awesome because, I mean, that is, I would think it's more valuable than people would initially think. Fire Shrieker, equipped creature is double strike. This is just a really good equipment. Double strike is such a powerful ability, and for equip 2, I will definitely take it every single time. General's Kabuto is a really good equipment. Cast for 4, equip for 2. Equipped creature can't be the target of spells or abilities, which means that it basically has hexproof / shroud. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to equipped creatures. So it cannot take damage on the field except for like board wipes or just general burn. But that is awesome because, I mean, Kemba's just almost always safe if this is attached to her, and like nothing can touch her except for something like a board wipe or burn. Godsend. This is a really expensive card, and it's definitely worth its mythic status. So, equipped creature gets +3/+3. Whenever equipped creature blocks or becomes blocked, you may exile one of those creatures. Opponents can cast cards with the same name as cards exiled with Godsend. Equipped for 3. Now, this admittedly is more useful in something like Modern or Standard or something 60 card, where you can have multiple creatures of the same type. Because you get its casting trigger then. But basically, this allows you to not only buff your equipped creature, but it almost won't take combat damage unless your opponent decides to stack block the creature that this is attached to. Because once it becomes blocked or blocks a creature, the creature that it is blocking, for example, will immediately become exile, and that will actually trigger before the combat damage goes through, meaning that if this was attached to Kemba, for example, she wouldn't take combat damage almost in the same fashion as General's Kabuto, which is pretty awesome. Gruul Warplow, this is basically just to get around chump blocking. I admit it's not really fitting for this type of deck, but I always love to throw a little bit of trample into all of my decks, and Gruul Warplow, I don't know, I just like it. I just like the card. It's as simple as that. Howl of Triumph, we've got pretty much just creatures you control the chosen color get +1/+1, so your standard sort of Glorious Anthem type of enchantment. Leering Emblem, whenever you play a spell, equipped creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. This is great because this ability stacks. So if you play 2 spells in a turn while this is equipped, all of a sudden your equipped creature gets +4/+4. And it's great because this card is flexible. So if you have a lot to do, you have a lot of spells in hand. For example, let's say you have a Brave the Sands, a bunch of cheap stuff like this in your hand, then the creature that this is equipped to is going to get really powerful really fast, which is pretty awesome. Loxodon Warhammer, great equipment. I think Loxodon Warhammer is its reputation precedes its whatever. It's just a great card. Equipped creature +3/+0 and has trample and lifelink. The lifelink feature is very nice. Mask of Memory. This card. This might be an outdated card. I don't remember having this in my deck, actually. So we'll move on. Masterwork of Ingenuity. So 1 cost, just copy target equipment. That's awesome because it's super versatile, and this card pretty much suits whatever need you have at the time of casting it. Now, do note, though, that this card, it will copy the equip cost of the equipment as well. So you may cast this for 1, but it's going to cost, for example, 6 mana to equip it if you copy an Argentum Armor. Promedallion, just an obvious choice. Quietus Spike is great. It I mean, I don't know. It goes well with something like Whisper Silk Cloak, where equipped creature is unblockable and has Shroud. And it gives, I mean, it's just a great equipment because if it's pretty much like Raving Dead, but actually like targeted. Pretty much if anything touches something that is equipped with Quietus Spike, it will die. And if it's not blocked, then an opponent is going to be losing a lot of health. So that's just a awesome equipment. Ring of Thune, kind of your standard ring equipment, equipped creatures, vigilance, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it, which is pretty good because it starts to stack really fast. Although these stacks, actually the counters do stay even if this is removed, which is pretty awesome. Skull Clamp, another great equipment, just +1/-1, and then when the equipped creature dies, you can draw 2 cards. This is just a great equipment because it's so cheap for what it does. The extra card draw is insanely good. And you can actually equip this to something like a 1/1 token to immediately kill it and draw 2 cards. And that was basically you were equipping it for 1 colorless to draw 2 cards, which is insanely cheap card draw. Soul Ring, Mana Ramp, Spear of Heliod, creatures get +1/+1, and you can tap it to destroy target creature that dealt damage to you this turn, so extra protection as well. Stratascythe is amazing. When it enters the battlefield, basically you search for a plains, and you exile it, and then equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land on the battlefield with the same name as the exiled card. So, for example, if you had something as average as 5 planes on the field, all of a sudden your equipped creature gets +5/+5, and that's amazing. And that is the number of lands on the battlefield. So not just your lands, but for example, your opponent who might be playing like a white-black deck, for example, for each planes that they have, your creature gets +1/+1 in addition, which is awesome. Sword of Vengeance, one of the best equipments in this game. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and that is amazing. That I don't even need to explain that. That's just so great. And then Whisper Silk Cloak, equipped creature is unblockable and has Shroud. Now, if you combo this, so it's great on its own because it gives you your equipped creature Shroud, which is something, like I said before, that's valuable for a creature that wants to stay on the board for a long time, like Kemba. So, but it is the fact that the equipped creature is unblockable as well. Means that if you combo with other buffs, so for example, maybe if you have like 1 or 2 enchantment buffs, like a couple Glorious Anthems on the battlefield, or cards like Glorious Anthem to be more specific, then all of a sudden you're going to be doing a lot of damage. If you combo this with something like Stratascythe, you're going to be doing a lot of damage, which is great. So, those equipments are, in my opinion, some of the best that I could find for this deck in determining if you want your creatures to sort of stay on the battlefield versus just straight buffs for extra damage, in addition to extra effects like Chariot of Victory, Sword of Vengeance, and all that. So, definitely a very good equipment lineup. Now, the creatures are mainly the creatures I chose kind of have with the thought that they are good for what they do, or rather what I kind of need for this deck, but also because they come from the Commander 2014 deck, which actually happened to be really accessible to me, being I bought the white Commander 2014 deck. So, I mean, either way, they're great creatures, but Angel of the Dire Hour is great control. You can exile all attacking creatures, and that's amazing. Very versatile, whether it's attacking you or maybe an ally. You can definitely destroy a lot of stuff, and it gets around indestructible, which is always nice. Angelic Field Marshal is your standard Lieutenant card. I believe the Lieutenant ability was introduced into Commander 2014. Don't quote me that, I'm not entirely sure. But creatures you control have Vigilance. That's a pretty decent ability, even though I already do have a Brave the Sands in the deck. But Vigilance is always nice. Celestial Crusader, other white creatures get +1/+1, Flash Flying, Split Second, all that stuff. Krovax, the Ascendant Hero, white creatures get +1/+1, And non-white creatures get -1/-1, and you can basically bounce it back to your hand if you want to avoid, board wipes or targeted burn or targeted destroy or whatever. So definitely a great card. Crusader of Odric, this definitely combos well with tokens. Power toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. I was thinking about having a Seraph of the Masses in here as well, but I didn't. I still don't like actually how much that card costs for what it does. That card is very niche in comparison to Crusader of Odric simply because it costs so much, even with its convoke ability. Geist Honored Monk, great card, great, again, just a great card that combos with number of tokens. It's basically Crusader of Odric, but better for how much it costs, so it's pretty much that. Grand Abolisher is always a good card. It's just great. Pretty much makes you immune to counter spells and all that stuff. Kemba, obviously. Mentor of the Meek is basically cheap card draw. Almost all of the creatures that are going to be spawned on the battlefield are of power 2 or less. So that's awesome. Pay that colorless to get to draw a card. Raksha Golden Cub. This, while it is a little bit niche, when it comes in useful, is absolutely devastating. 7 cost 3/4, but he has Vigilance, and as long as he is equipped, a lot like Kemba, cats you control get +2/+2 and have double strike. So I have won a match before simply off the fact that I had 2 to 3 tokens that were buffed up once from one of these enchantments, so something like a Glorious Anthem, and then they had the additional +2/+2, so all of a sudden they were 5/5s. And they all had double strike, and that is a lot of damage coming in your opponent's direction if you manage to get that off. So very niche card, but when he comes in useful, he comes in very useful. Requiem Angel, whenever another non-spirit creature control dies, put a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. This is great because, in white, because your tokens tend to be a little bit more weak, they tend to go down a lot faster. So then you can basically just replace something like a 2/2 cat with a 1/1 flying spirit, which really isn't that bad of a trade-off. Sarah Avatar, classic card. I've had my butt beaten with this card a couple of times at least. Its power and toughness are equal to your life total, and it basically gets shuffled into the library when it dies or is put into your graveyard. So if you manage to get this out and you still have 40 life for some reason, you have a 40/40/4/7. The downside of this is that it is subject to pretty much any removal out there, like just a simple murder spell by black will kill this. But until then, if you equip it with something that gives it trample, if you happen to have Grew Warplow on the field, if you happen to have Sword of Vengeance, and you give this thing trample, all of a sudden, way more deadly. Silverblade Paladin, you can soul bond it to give it double strike, incredibly good card. Steel Shaper Apprentice, it's basically tutoring for equipment, but it tends to cost a lot because it's 4 to cast, and then you cast an additional white, and then you have to tap it, return it to your hand. So it's a very slow-moving, little bit of a high-cost tutoring card, but other than that, well, I take that back. It's not really that high-costing, because if you look at something like Diabolic Tutor, that's a 4-cost as well. But it's just kind of slow-moving because you have to cast it, wait for Summoning Sickness to wear off. So pretty much, if you have this and are planning on using it, you can only actually search for an equipment card once every 2 turns, which is rather slow in a multiplayer match. Sun Titan, your classic Titan card. You can return, cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if your opponent happens to be killing, or rather destroying a lot of your artifacts, aka your equipment, almost all of this equipment is converted mana cost 3 or less, which is awesome in addition to these enchantments. So Sun Titan definitely comes in very useful in this deck. Sunblast Angel is pretty much Angel of the Dire Hour, but it doesn't have flash, and it basically will do the same thing but destroy for, I think, is it 1 less mana? That's a 7 cost. This is a 6 cost. So yeah, for 1 less mana, basically does the same thing. Okay, so sorceries here we have, these are mainly control and token spawners. So Decree of Justice is niche in the late game again. I think its cycling ability personally is actually a lot better than its regular ability, just because if you happen to have a large amount of mana, for example, let's say that you have 12 mana on the board, you have to pay for 4 for the casting cost. Okay, so now you have 8 mana, so now you have to divide that by 2, so you're gonna spawn 4 angels for 12 mana. I don't think that's that worth the mana that you're using. Instead, I'd rather cycle it, and the extra card draw does come in a little bit handy. So let's say you have, I mean, here again, it's flexible, which is pretty great. Let's say you have 2 card buffs on the field, then you might want to spawn something like, let's say you have 12 mana. Again, you pay the 3 for the cycling cost, and now you have 9 mana. You're going to put 9 3/3 soldiers on the field, and you're going to draw a card. Now that to me is a lot more useful than the 4/4 angels, but again, that's all. It's a flexible card, and it's meant to be used that way. Deploy to the front is awesome. It will double your, well, it will just give you a crap ton of soldiers, which is awesome. A little bit niche, depending on how many how many creatures are on the field, but in general, if you say this for the right time, it will be very worth it. Gift of Estates, basically just helps you to not be mana screwed. This is definitely a good card, but make sure that you use it when you're not going to have to discard a card from having too big of a hand size. Marshal Coup is a great card from the Fortune Stone set. Basically a board wipe that just gives you soldiers, which is awesome. Mass Calcify is a great board wipe, a very high cost board wipe, but it destroys non-white creatures, so you keep your creatures, which is definitely worth the extra mana. Nomad's Assembly will basically double your creatures twice because of its extra rebound ability, which is awesome. Spectral Possession, you pay 3 white to get 3 white flying spirits. They're kind of run-of-the-mill, but not a bad card. And then Stormherd, the highest cost card on this deck, will put X 1/1 flying tokens, where X is your life total. So if you happen, obviously this is going to be cast in the late game. So let's say in the late game you have 20 life left. You are going to get 20 1/1 tokens, which is not bad. Like, that's really good. It's better than something like a Decree of Justice cycled. And if you added one of these creature buffs, Glorious Anthem or Honor of the Pure or something like that, they become very, very powerful. And then we included Nahiri for the extra, obviously, token spawn, but by some chance, if you happen to farm her into Stoneforge Blade, it's pretty much GG at that point. Alright, so enchantments. Armored Ascension, basically, this just buffs up a creature a lot. Brave the Sands, give creatures you control have vigilance. Cathar's Crusade, I already pretty much explained. Your creatures get ridiculously powerful with the more creatures that you have, so this combos well with any tokens that are being spawned in mass quantities. Glorious Anthem, Honor of the Pure, Life from Within, Marshal's Anthem, Parapet, I already explained those. Spectral Ward will give the enchanted creature protection from all colors, so something that's better even than Hexproof or Shroud, because it won't take combat damage either. So almost like a General's Kabuto in a way, functions largely the same way, except that the equipped creature, or rather the enchanted creature, can't be blocked, or it will not take damage from blocking, which is awesome. And then it gives it +2/+2, which is always nice. True Conviction, already pretty much explained that. So with all of these cards together, it's kind of between a medium to high spell cost in this deck. So I decided to include 37 land because I figured that's enough, so you're not getting mana screwed. But I mean, there are a little bit more cheaper spells in this deck that I would say, mostly because, I mean, like I said, equipment is really, really deceiving in how much it actually costs, but it's better. I mean, you can obviously cast it for its lower casting cost on like one turn, and then equip it on the next turn. So really, you don't need something ridiculous like 40 mana. Plus, we have stuff like Soul Ring. If I wanted to, I could include Thran Dynamo 2, which is a really good equipment card. But we've got, you know, stuff like Pearl Medallion. So I figured 37 land was enough, but just about at the right amount. So just general non-basic lands. We've got a cycling land. And Marry the Sky Rune is pretty much a necessary component, being you're going to be running mono white, because at the beginning of upkeep, if you control 7 or more planes, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That is during every upkeep. That is insanely good. And you probably will end up with 7 or more planes during the majority of your matches with this deck. Karoo is your basic add 1 colorless, 1 white to mana pool. Reliquary Tower, you have no maximum hand size. I just like to include this just because it's not having a maximum hand size is really nice, I guess. I don't know. I just really like that ability. Secluded Step, another cycling land. And then Temple of the False God is a very good commander card, I guess. It's just a good card in general, I would say, because you just get free mana. And yeah. And then maybe board is just Nearheath Pilgrim just for some extra lifelink, I figured. So that is my commander deck with Kemba. She is, rather, the deck is very competitive with the other decks that I have. I have my own green trample deck, which I've featured on this channel before, and a slightly modified black Sworn to Darkness deck. So this deck tends to be really scrappy. You don't really run into many mana issues, and you know, the deck can be kind of bursty in a way. You'll all of a sudden get just a crap ton of tokens, and they're hard to get rid of all at once, and obviously unless you're running a board wipe, but those are a little bit rarer, obviously, than most other cards. So in general, it's definitely a good deck. Good little deck here, and definitely all of his enchantments do help. And yeah. So, that's the deck. It's surprisingly cheap, actually. $65.85 at TCG. Mostly because a lot of these cards are from the Commander 2014 Forged in Stone deck, which, because that Commander deck, I think, was so mass-produced, I think just the supply and the demand made it so that those cards from that deck are cheaper. So in reality, if the Commander 2014 deck hadn't ever been released, in theory, I think this deck might cost a lot more, something like 100 to 120 bucks. But just because all of these cards can be found for cheap, then that does reduce the cost significantly. So I would definitely suggest this deck to anybody, just anybody who likes Token Swarm. It's definitely a good deck to have. And I mean, I could include stuff like Elspeth, which gives, I mean, there's a lot of Elspeth Planeswalkers out there, but I'm thinking of the one that gives you 3 1/1 soldiers for her +1 or +2 or whatever. I think it might be Elspeth the Sun's Champion. But I wanted to keep the deck obviously within like a reasonable price range, and something like a $10 card in that situation isn't really, you know, I didn't want to go over the top with the card costs. So for how much it costs, this deck is really good, and I would definitely suggest it to anybody. And yeah, I guess if you guys want to check this out, I'll link it in the description, and you can play test it or whatever if you're curious. And yeah, so here is what I will wrap up the video, guys. Thank you all for watching. Feel free to subscribe and leave a rating on the video and all that stuff. So thank you for watching, and have a nice day. See you later.